Okay, welcome back from after lunch. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Callum. I'm from LastPass, and I am the SMB account executive. I'm joined here by Sarah, who is one of our business development reps. Now, you're probably going to question, what validity do we have to be up here speaking to you today? Hopefully you're going to give us the opportunity to validate that for you and show you. But obviously, in our realm of work, we discuss and have conversations on a day-to-day basis with people like yourself. So we're just here to really present, hopefully on the next slide, around all things passwords, essentially. And you may have seen with the rebrand out the back of our stand, a passwordless future. We'll touch on that and a bit of the evolution of passwords. But ultimately, building a culture of cybersecurity for us is identified as the top objective here. I'll touch on it in due course in a second, but human behavior is ultimately our biggest nemesis. And despite everything that's coming with artificial intelligence and the likes, bar another COVID round 2 extreme, I don't think we're going anywhere. So we need to make sure that we are doing something to help us with that. So a slight overview. I'm conscious I might be blocking these guys' views, so apologies if I'm walking up and down and whatever. 4 main outcomes for today. The pervasive password problem, the current state versus future state of passwords, cognitive dissonance, big word for today, but we'll touch on that, and human behaviors within cybersecurity, and how to build a cybersecurity culture. So we'll start with the pervasive password problem. A bit of alliteration, no guesses for the fact that we went to a marketing agency and came up with such words. Essentially what it means is it's across your organization, okay? Typically, a lot of our conversations happen with the IT sector and the IT teams and departments. But actually, when we double down into that, what we find is IT professionals usually, and I'll underscore usually, are the ones with the best habits and behaviors. And they're not necessarily our weakest point as a company. That said, they are typically the starting point for putting in culture change and going forward. So, as I said, human behavior leads to risk. We're all here, I hope, to try and minimize risks within our organizations. Whether we can bring in applications, software, etc., obviously that's our intention, but as I mentioned at the start, human behavior is the #1 nemesis. I don't want to sound aggressive, but equally I want to kind of get the message home that let's not look too far away from home with where the problem might be. In that, 9 out of 10 users know they have a password problem. 51% of people rely on memory to remember passwords. Now, a bit of audience participation. I know you don't want this, but there's no right, wrong answer. There's no detentions or anything like that. Who's reused a password? Yeah? We've all done it. Who somewhere in their house or in their office, whether personal or professional, has got a password written down? To be fair, quite a few less hands, so I'll take that. But basically, 2 out of 3 of us reuse passwords over and over again. If we double down onto that again, just before we move on to this slide, how many of us have equally got a password on a website that is our dog's name versus, or our dog's name and the day they were born, or something like that? It's around that complexity that we really need to try and progress and enhance. Why do we need to do that? Well, this is what we're looking at here. In terms of the graph here, this is the percentage in terms of its prevalence. And then up the side, we've obviously got the dollar value in USD. As you can obviously see here, 4.5 million US dollars is the average cost due to stolen or compromised credentials. Now, some of you, I'm going to second guess this, might think we are an expensive vendor. We're also not that expensive, though. So we're also trying to be here today to educate around being proactive rather than reactive. And oftentimes, people are saying that actually things inside the SSO application is where we're housing things, and we're happy. That's great. But as we'll come on to in due course on a couple of slides, what's happening outside of SSO that you guys don't know about, particularly with the enhancement of remote work. As you can see on the right-hand side, it's the average time to identify and contain a data breach by the initial attack vendor. Okay? And again, what we've got here is the mean time to identify and the mean time to contain. So I hope this is not the case for anyone sat out there. But it could well be that data and credentials are already compromised, but we're still in this time of containment and identifying it, okay? So we need to be proactive rather than reactive. It's kind of our message with this one. The root cause of it, as I say, 85% of breaches globally involve that human element. Most of which are linked to credentials. This is enhanced, obviously, trying to show the global importance of this with some Australian and Australasia statistics that 65% of cyber incidents are caused by compromised credentials. So it really is a global issue, and it's one that, whilst I understand you might say is not within your house, I would challenge you to validate that. So we've got a bit of a background there as to where we're at, but what's the current state versus the future state? Well, the Lindy effect here essentially shows that the longer something stays, the longer it stays, the harder it is to change. And we're obviously moving towards a passwordless future, but we're also not naive enough to recognize that this is going to happen overnight. Okay? Things have happened whereby, for example, in the 1990s, we had user PKIs. In the early 2000s, we had SAML, SSO. Mid-2000s, OpenID. Early 2010, OIDC and OAuth. Mid-2010s, biometrics. It takes time. But what's the future? That's why we're here, right? The whole name of the conference, the future of cybersecurity. What's the future of passwords? For us, it is passwordless authentication. Okay? And this is a bit of a timeline to kind of point that out to you. And the reason we're going that way is because bad passwords happen to good people. As I mentioned to you at the start, typically we see the first deployment of LastPass particularly going out to IT professionals in the IT department. We would consider them the good people. Okay? But having done research in accounts that we've got and having had people take the software on board and then run the analysis, we have found not everyone is as good as they think they are or what they say. And this leads to cognitive dissonance, okay, which essentially then brings us on to this second point here. I'm not calling you liars, but I'm challenging whether what you say is what you do. And more importantly, is it what your end users do? Is it what your marketing department do? No offense if there's any marketeers here. Is it what your finance department does? Is it what everyone in your organization is doing? And can you actually evidence and validate that? To reiterate some of the numbers here, 92% of people know that using the same password is risky. Yet 45% didn't change their password even after the breach. Could those statistics be relevant in your organization? If they are, two questions. One, how do you know? Two, when do you act? Trying to put a little bit of light-hearted humor into it, what we try and do is use these pictures to illustrate that you might have the biggest budget, you might also not have the biggest budget, okay? And I'm not here to ask you to go and request extraordinary amounts of budget, but you might have the multi-million-dollar cyber budget where you're really securing yourself, you're putting your armor on, you're bolting, bracing, batten down the hatches, and then someone, somewhere, has found your eye-slit gap. It's incredible and worrying, as we all know, the level of professionalism that our bad actors, threat actors, hackers, call them what you will, can do. Their professionalism is incredible. All they need is one entry in, as we all know. Then they can move laterally and do things exponentially. And often, obviously, password is right at the end point, and we need to make sure we're securing that in the best way we can. How do we do that? Well, it starts by changing habits. Every one of us here, despite what you're going to tell me, you don't like change, do you? We don't like change. We're human. It disrupts our normal workflow. We resent it. We push back on it. That obviously then cascades down into the organization, despite the mandate that we're trying to do, be it a project we're trying to put in, or something an IT manager, or indeed more senior, has told us to do. So what we need to do is we need to build a cybersecurity culture, because poor habits are all too common in every business. These are just 5 most common examples that we find in conversations and in research as to what's happening in organizations. So there's a lack of password protection and visibility across all apps in all departments. And I underscore there that all apps in all departments. We often use the analogy, if you've got SSO-enabled applications and you think that's your kind of security, or indeed, you only secure a subsection of your organization, let me ask you this: how many of you go to bed at night, lock the front door, and keep the lounge window open? None of you. Relating it back to work, that's essentially what we're doing. We're locking the front door because we're securing a subsection, but we're saying to the bad actors, threat actors, hackers, if you can find my front window, have a crack, see what you can do. From a user behavior perspective, poor password hygiene. As I say, how many of us have reused a password? How many of us don't have the complexity it needs? How many of us make it something that's very, very, very personal to ourselves, such that if someone was to get some PPI on some personal data, put the pieces of the jigsaw together, happy days. How many of you, question, share sensitive information either over text, emails, Excel spreadsheet, or another forum, but in your day-to-day working? Or have I all spoken too much and you've disengaged? Because there was no hands up there, and I don't believe it. I'll imagine a few of you put your hands up, okay? So, the reason being, what you also need to do is secure that sharing of it. Particularly as we go into the remote world that we're now in. Gone are the days of passing that post-it note across the desk, or even sending the email with the non-encrypted password, etc., etc. Okay? Take us, for example. I'm based in Sheffield. Sarah's based in London. If Sarah wants a password that we share, for whatever reason, how am I getting that to her securely? Okay? And it also allows us to share passwords internally and externally. Sarah.
So I'm going to take a different point of view from what Callum just walked us through. He walked us through the solution itself and the pervasive passwordless journey. I'm going to focus on what LastPass wants to achieve and help businesses achieve, which is a cybersecurity culture. So as Callum said, 80% of breaches do occur due to human behavior and human error. And education is the foundation of that. Before working at LastPass, I was awful with passwords. I had no clue what cybersecurity would cover, and I'm sure that as industry experts, you know that threats are constantly evolving, and so is the cybersecurity landscape alongside technology. So walking through, there's different ways we can help employees to educate themselves and educate ourselves to create that best cybersecurity culture. So cybersecurity is a mindset. It's something we do daily, and it's something that we should spread across the business from C-suite to intern. It's something that everyone should instill in their day-to-day lives and in their organization. And this can be achieved through security policies, for example, where we set clear policies for employees to follow and update those alongside threats that do constantly change. We can do that with leadership buy-in. So make sure that you do get leadership buy-in, and that C-suite and leadership give the example to employees and help them understand why cybersecurity is important for your organizational data and their own. Invest in technology. So I believe that cybersecurity as a culture walks alongside what Callum was talking about, so the solution itself. Educate employees, but at the same time invest in technology like single sign-on, multi-factor authentication, or a password manager or a PAM solution. Prioritize education. Training is of fundamental importance. We should train our employees more often. In past companies, I had no cybersecurity training. I'm sure I made massive mistakes that could have ended in a 4.5 billion or million loss for the company. I didn't know. And use internal advocates and rewards. So you can set rewards. Cybersecurity doesn't have to be boring, especially when we're educating the employees that are a part of our organization on a day-to-day basis. And then develop a long-term strategy. So with the cybersecurity landscape constantly evolving, make sure you have a strategy and you have a risk management strategy to make sure that if anything does occur, you're ready to, evolve with the cybersecurity landscape itself. And yeah, basically, Callum, this is like the walkthrough I just went through. He was holding the remote.
Sorry, my fault.
But yeah, so we at LastPass do believe that a cybersecurity culture walks alongside the pervasive password solution itself. We want to help organizations to build that cybersecurity culture. We want to help you educate employees on the importance of cybersecurity. I'm open to questions if you have any. That was what I wanted to walk through very briefly, but we're at the stand at the very end, so if you do want to ask us anything, please come and find us.
With a bit of time, okay, does anyone have any questions with regards to how we might be able to support a cybersecurity culture? We do have 5 minutes, and I'm going to be very strict on the 5 minutes, okay? Happy to answer questions. If we can't answer them truthfully here, we can engage in conversations at the back, or indeed, if we can't answer them at all, we'll be honest with it. Or you can all have 12 minutes back in your life, not listen to me anymore. I know which option I'd choose, but there's no pressure. Sounds like the toilet might be calling for quite a few of you, which is not a problem. So you've probably got a couple of minutes, okay. We are back in here at 2 o'clock for the afternoon session. All right, thanks very much, guys.
Thank you.